if you're going to do something new, you want to make sure that the hurdles to starting are not so great that you never start. So we had to start. So I'd say we took the easy way, which was, all right, we're not exactly sure how this is going to go, but by God, we're just going to start. And for me, that is an important life lesson and career lesson. Greetings, friends. I'm James.
And I'm Randy. You're listening to the Passionately Wrong podcast, where we challenge your assumptions, offer some different perspectives, and hopefully help you make better decisions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this finale of the Passionately Wrong podcast. I'm here together with my friend and co-host, Randy. Today, we're going to give you a brief wrap-up of what we did on the Passionately Wrong podcast, what we learned doing it, and give you a sense of what's coming next. So, Randy, we had 77 episodes, counting the intro and this one, and we covered a lot of topics along the way. I went back and I looked at the themes that we covered over this time, and they fell into a couple of areas that I'll briefly describe. I don't think we had this idea in mind when we started. We called it the Passionately Wrong podcast. And in general, what we said was we wanted to help people be wrong less often. I like to think that we did cover that on many of our episodes, but really the organization was topical. We spent about a third of our time doing interviews with interesting people from around the world. Another almost third talking about career related topics, how to succeed in this or that endeavor. What were the different types of careers available to people? A little bit more than 20% of time talking about self-improvement, productivity, life hacks type thing. And of course, given your background, we spent about 10% of the time specifically talking about military topics. Of course, there was military that came up in the other areas as well, careers. A lot of the interviews were with military colleagues that you knew who brought some really awesome perspectives to us. And then given both of our backgrounds and the people we know, we did spend a fair number of time, about 6%, talking about non-US topics, foreign topics, what it's like living overseas, moving overseas, and things like that. Do you feel like we held true to the theme? Do you have any other observations about those topics that we ended up talking about for most of the episode?
So it's funny that we went everywhere, given that when I mentor writers on their book and they want to write everything, I'm always like, you need to focus. You need to focus on a theme so that the reader stays with you. And I think in a way, I didn't want to be restrained because it's harder. I think we were lazy by not saying we wanted to write a specific theme so that we would attract the listeners who wanted to listen to that specific theme, because we were so all over the map. And I don't regret doing any of it, to tell you the truth. But when we were all over the map, it's hard to get loyal listeners unless they just love us, which was about 25 people. But there's a lot of people that listen to specific ones or watch them on YouTube. And obviously those topics interested them because they were searching for them or whatever, or the people we interviewed on them promoted them and their followers wanted to watch what he had to say. But in a way, from a editor point of view, it was a very lazy way to start. We debated over the title for a while before we got to Passionately Wrong. And I think the problem with Passionately Wrong is there are some podcasts out there that talk about everything that are pretty good. Most of them are interview based though. So you're getting a new person, interesting person that's an expert and stuff. And we did that a third of the time, but we did that very late in our program. And so it wasn't really our focus. And we just happened to get a couple of good interviews at the end. I loved all the talk. I loved reconnecting with you, James, even though we haven't met in person in over almost 35 years. And we're going to have to get around to that sometime. And I liked talking about the different things. It wasn't much debating. We had a lot of agreement for the most part, and it was just learning from each other. We learned a lot. I think we have we can probably go into this podcast later on after I finish speaking on this piece right here, is we can probably say what we learned about making a podcast, so that the finale is, if anyone wants to make a podcast, maybe we pass on our pros and cons and lessons learned. So for the last episode, the last 10 or 15 minutes of the episode, and what we could have done better, or how we could have changed stuff to make it more popular. It wasn't I think the most people we ever got to watch one episode was like 120 or something like that.
So we did agree a lot, and that was always fun. And when we didn't agree, it was usually in a matter of degree. But I'm going to disagree slightly with you on a word that you used. It's correct, but I want to give some context to it. You said we were lazy. And we were lazy, Randy, in the sense that I think we took the path of what appeared to be least resistance or highest success, I'll say. If you're going to do something new, you want to make sure that the hurdles to starting are not so great that you never start. So we had to start. So I'd say we took the easy way, which was, all right, we're not exactly sure how this is going to go, but by God, we're just going to start. And for me, that is an important life lesson and career lesson. Opportunities are going to present themselves to you in life all the time. And first of all, observing it and being alert to it. And then secondly, being open to taking that opportunity. But third, it has to be at a level of difficulty that you say, I can do it. And you had more experience podcasting than I did. I didn't have much. And so I appreciate that we took what I'll call an easy approach. Hey, let's just try it and see how it evolves. And so for me, that allowed me to overcome the hurdle of, oh, I'm going to try something new and different. And I appreciate that you made it easy for me, Randy, to join you on this podcast. I learned a lot along the way.
And I'll go through these lists of things we came up with was like message to listener. Basically, I think our message, we try to focus on people being passionately wrong and give them positives and negatives of ways to look at things and maybe different angles to look at things. Sometimes I think we went off topic on that and we forgot to even tie it in. We were getting so we were excited about the topics. And sometimes we forgot to tie in I didn't tie in Mike, which was our last interview, Mike Rodriguez. I didn't tie him into the Passionately Wrong podcast. Like, hey, what did people think about memorials? I could have did that. I just like, hey, it was great to talk to you, Mike. But I think the message was always just to pass on good kind of objective information to everyone based on our experiences. And I think we did accomplish that.
Yeah, I think so too, Randy. I listened to our episodes afterwards as part of the process of preparing a podcast. There's the prep for it, the doing it, and then there's the after stuff, and you can get more efficient with that. But I listened to most of them several times, and I don't think it's just narcissism that comes from hearing your own voice. I really don't. I think we did a decent job on most of them of not making people listen to it and say, well, that didn't provide me anything. I thought most of them had a point, and we might have done it in a casual fashion, a storytelling fashion, just seeing where it goes. But I like podcasts personally that take the form of a conversation where neither party necessarily knows where it's going to go. Otherwise, it's just scripted. You could read something and I get it. That's also interesting, but you get a little bit of interaction and that makes it fun, which means it's unpredictable. So you're right. We started this podcast in part just to reconnect after many years of having done separate things and then realizing, oh, our lives actually have some similarities and we see the world in a similar way, but come from such different backgrounds. That all by itself was an intriguing reason to spend more time talking with one another. We started in a similar spot, then did very different things. How much do we see the world the same now? And why do we see it that way? And for me, I just enjoyed that. Also, not just personal viewpoints, but the fact that there are so many similarities between the military's approach to successfully achieving the mission and on a corporate scale, what does successfully implementing a strategy mean? And all sorts of issues come up that are very similar in approach, which I found reassuring. So anyway, we had our personal reasons and hopefully there were some benefits to listeners as a result of the topics that we discussed. What I learned about podcasting, on the one hand, it is actually relatively easy to start and host and run a podcast. The technical skills necessary aren't high. It's a little daunting at first because there's so much information out there, but I think we kept it reasonably simple we tried a couple different methods at the start, and then we ended up on a relatively simple approach of we're recording this on Zoom. After the recording is done on Zoom, we upload it to a tool that allows us to transcribe the podcast. So the video and the audio are synced and you get a text transcription. That tool is Descript. So the recording on Zoom, the uploading and transcribing on Descript, and then preparing show notes. We just did that with a Google Doc that we updated each time with the specific notes, and then uploading the episodes. We prepared two different types of episodes each time. One, a video that was uploaded to your YouTube channel, and the other, the audio podcast. Yes, the video is also available, but the podcast format, which then was distributed to all of the podcast platforms via a platform called Buzzsprout. How hard was it to set up Buzzsprout? Because you're the one who set up the back end for that.
Yeah, it was pretty easy. I initially signed up for kind of the lowest one, but we could only upload 4 hours a month. And we were told each other we'd only do half-hour episodes, but we ended up doing like hour and a half episodes sometimes. So it ended up being more than 4 hours. So I moved us up to the second level. But other than setting up was, I don't know, hour or two max, really. And I was just trying to answer the questions and figure out where we wanted our podcasts, if we wanted it on Spotify and all these different other things, and then getting all that information in there. Other than that, it was pretty simple. After every episode, getting Buzzsprout on there, getting into Buzzsprout was as easy as like uploading the audio, copying the show notes into the thing, couple clicks after that, making some keywords, and then scheduling it. So really it took 15 or 20 minutes for Buzzsprout and then 15 or 20 minutes for YouTube, which was very similar.
Perhaps they're more elaborate in the preparation of topics. I should also mention that we prepared a pretty elaborate list of topics, our episode topics that we then, it was just a Google document that we added to both of us when we had an idea. We would put something on there, and we took a number of our episode themes from that list, most of them actually. We still have a bunch of episode themes on there. I think I counted 27 ideas that we never got around to. So it's not that we ran out of ideas, Randy. Maybe we ought to mention, why are we stopping the podcast? We were doing great. We're having fun. Did you get mad at me? Did you get busy? Did I get tired of it, distracted by other things? There are probably different reasons, but I'm curious. What would you say are the reasons for not just having started it, which we talked about, but now why are we putting a pin in this one and moving on to something else?
Well, we did it for almost a year and a half, a little bit over a year and a half. And we were pretty good about our battle rhythm, which, as we call it in the military, in the first year. We always had 5 cached and we were always ahead. And then you were traveling for work and to get for classes, and I was traveling for work and I got more work. And so we started slowing down and not meeting every week to do the episodes. And so to me, it became work, because I'm like, oh, I gotta get this out. And because we're not making any money from this. If anything, we're spending money to put it on the podcast and everything. So it was just fun. And when it became work, it wasn't fun anymore. It was stress. And in fact, we missed a couple of weeks in the end. And part of that was, I think part of it was we covered all the subjects that we were emotional about. And then maybe the other subjects were secondary subjects, like what else can we do? And we put some other good subjects on there, but maybe they weren't our favorite subjects. And I think we also had an idea that eventually this would turn into like an Ash video home. And a lot of people from our class in Ash would come in and tell us where they're at and stuff. And that would be nice. But that didn't really take off as well as we thought. For whatever reason, people were shy or they didn't want to be on a podcast or whatever. We get a couple teachers that I think I knew one and you knew the rest. And so that was interesting. And then we had a couple of we didn't have like a lot of people from our class though, did we? Just like 1 or 2. Even our best friends, like, were like, hey, yeah, we'll do it. And they're like, nah, they didn't show up.
Right. So there's 2 things, I think, in that. When an activity feels more like a chore than it does like fun, then at least for something like this, that's a little bit of an indication you need to think about and evaluate how it's going. Just because you started something, I fall into this trap. I tell myself I'm the kind of person who never gives up, and I always finish not only what I start, but by God, if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. That's part of my identity. So it's useful and helpful to understand that just because you start something doesn't mean that's now what you do for the rest of your life. You can start things, learn from them, and then pivot. That probably the feeling that you're describing of we fell behind, and it wasn't because we didn't want to do it. It's just we got busy and then we didn't get back to it. That was a little bit of a hint that, well, okay, if it was so important, you would have found a way to do it in between. And it is important. It is fun. I like that we're ending on a high note, because I feel like the body of work that we created is something I'm proud of. And I also feel like it won't be bad for us to turn to another topic now where we feel excited and energized by. We'll talk about that in a minute. So as to why we didn't get some of the traction we had perhaps imagined or hoped, I would say, based on our discussions about publishing, there's the creation of the work and then there's the marketing of the work. And we spent the great majority of our time on the first, not the second. And I don't know if that played a role or not, but I kept on telling myself after pretty much every episode, oh, I got to say something about this on LinkedIn. And you did that several times. I appreciate it. I didn't do it as much as I could have. I wrote about it on my separate blogs and I mentioned it, but I don't think, if I'm honest, I put as much effort into marketing as I believe is probably necessary for any content creation type activity to be successful. You can get lucky and have a video go viral or something. But so that's my other observation is, yeah, okay, we didn't promote it heavily.
My experience with marketing for books and other things is some of the authors we interviewed also said this, like the writing of the book was 25%. The production of the podcast should be 25%. Then the marketing, whether we put it on social media, if we're going to put quotes from the thing and put it like on Instagram Reels, that should be like the 75% if we're actually going to take it seriously or hire a company to do it, because that's more money out of our pocket. We're not making any money at all. But we could have, I think, like for the next one, which like you said, we'll talk about in a minute, we could, since we're going to start so early and get a kind of a cachet going, we can actually have some of that stuff ahead of time. Like we can have the quotes and reels and things like that, which are pretty easy to do, though they're very intimidating at our age when we're not used to doing it. We're like, oh, it's going to take me an hour to make a reel. People take like 5 minutes to make a reel, and that looks pretty good. And once you get into a rhythm, so it's just something that maybe we have to concentrate on. I think the next podcast will have a theme that will resonate with a lot of people. So if we get the right Instagram reels and Facebook posts and things like that, I think it'll work out really well.
So you are already addressing the two questions I wanted to address before we talk about what's next. And that was, what would we do the same and what would we do differently? From my perspective, what we would do the same is pick topics that are emotionally interesting to us, that we are energized by, and which we hopefully know something about. So it's a combination of enthusiasm and expertise that comes across when people are listening. So that part for me is definitely appropriate. We will probably limit ourselves more narrowly to a defined topic, which makes it easier for listeners to know, aha, this is what I'm going to get when I come to listen to this one. And this is what Randy and James are talking about here. So we'll be more focused for our watchers and listeners. The enthusiasm, the expertise, the focus, that's a little bit of things that I say I could see happening. And then what you were just talking about in terms of additional methods of marketing the podcasts and maybe going a step further in our evolution as sophisticated podcasters, being able to take excerpts and cuts and repurposing that content in a way that we don't spend a lot more time on as soon as we figure out how to do it correctly. It's just, okay, now this little snippet gets placed over here and that one gets placed over there. What we did previously, which I would hope we do again this time, is divide up the work a little bit, where there's still going to be mechanics behind the creation of the podcast. And now we're going to be adding our mechanics behind the creation of additional pieces of it or additions to it. And so we'll have to figure out who takes what responsibility for that. We'll probably divide, okay, you take these channels and you take these channels. Any other things that you would add to those two questions?
No, my experience is it's better if one person does one episode of the marketing, because you can reuse the videos in multiple Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, whatever we're going to do, which we have to figure out. And then we make an account for our podcast so that we can both have access to it. And then we're both loading it. We both learn and load. And so we're like, hey, I'm going to do it for this month, and then you do it for next month or something like that. But basically you're using the same videos. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel where I'm like, I'm going to do Instagram and you're going to do Facebook. Or the other option is one guy does the video, one guy does the stills. Like stills are better on Facebook. Instagram Reels seem to be a big hit, and TikTok's obviously video. So it depends on what we're going to do it on and how we're going to do it. We'll figure that out, I'm sure.
Yeah, that will be for me already an interesting decision process to the theme of Passionately Wrong. How do you figure out how to do something new like this? There's a ton of advice, just like there is about starting a podcast, but we're going to have to learn a little bit more about marketing a podcast and just that basic question. Well, okay, where do we devote our time? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it TikTok? Something else? And in part, that'll be a function of the theme that we're choosing. And we can talk about that now, let people know what's coming, because where's our audience? Where are they spending time? And part B, it'll be probably just experimenting and saying, all right, how do we like it? Even if we have a choice of, let's say, 5 different channels, we might just personally have a preference for, okay, this is relatively easy and quick. And so we're just going to maybe devote a little bit more time to that.
We need to get our systems down, and we need to also make sure it's fun and not too much work, especially if it's not paying work.
Right. And so that goes to the motive of why create a podcast. I guess you and I might have had different motives or at least in part. And so I would say for me, one of the motives of all the content creation I do is simply the sharing of useful knowledge. I've learned a lot by reading, by talking to people, by working in different settings. And it always seems a shame to me that the collective knowledge that humanity accumulates, that a person accumulates, if you think about how much a person at 60 or 80 knows compared to what that person knew at 20, if there was only a way to get the knowledge that that person has later in life and pass it on in a convenient fashion to people earlier, so much heartache, difficulty, and floundering around could be spared. So for me, I have this sense of, boy, I would really love to find a way to find willing ears, willing eyes to take in the lessons that I think are genuinely applicable. And so I have this sense of I'd like to share stuff. And if that comes with money, of course, money's always nice, but that was never the motive for me. And I don't think it was for you either. Of course, you didn't expect that we would make money for this podcast, but you did expect, I think, to maybe draw some attention to yourself and your other activities because you are working as an editor, helping people create content to get their messages out to the world. What were some of your motives in creating it? And then we can wrap this up because I know we've already gone longer than we said we would, which happens to us on most of our episodes.
I hadn't done a podcast in a while, so I wanted to understand the new nuances for when the technology moves so fast. I just wanted to make sure I understood. I was always thinking about doing not that ours wasn't substantive, what's the word?
Substantive.
Substantive, but I wanted to do something on writing specifically. And so doing this with you, reconnecting with you is cool. And then also learning all the nuances of what's the best technology to use. How hard does it have to look to be semi-professional or even professional? And then the marketing, I wish I'd spent a little bit more time on it because I'd like to know that too, what works and what doesn't work. And I'm sure it's different for every podcast and every community and listener group. That's the reason I wanted to do it. I'd done two before, one in 2019, and then I did one in 2020. So that was good 3 years prior. And technology changed so fast, especially during COVID, that there's a lot of things I wanted to learn. Like the script, I didn't use that for either one. I had got introduced to it at the end of the last one. Someone had mentioned it. And then I actually used a script for all of my interviews with my clients when I'm writing memoirs. I tape them on Zoom, record them on Zoom, and then I used a script to transcribe and then use that transcription to help me write their memoirs with their words. And so that's when I got the idea. They're marketing it for podcasts too. But I said, hey, maybe this is the way forward. Maybe this is an easy way to get this done. And it turned out to be not too hard.
My favorite kinds of learnings and experiences are those that have applicability in multiple domains. So if you say, I'm learning this over here, and it's also going to benefit me over here in some other area of my life, those are great. Those are ways that you can say, I'm really getting a good value for my time spent here or my money spent because this thing that I'm learning is going to benefit me, not just here, but also here. And I think you're right. Some of the things that we've done here do have that benefit. I believe also, Randy, by the practice that you and I have had in recording these sessions, seeing ourselves after we do it, and me editing it, for example, I've become much more attuned to the difficulty in speaking coherently for long periods of time, not having lots of ums and ahs and filler words, as the script calls them, in your speech. So just a little bit of practice about mindfully coming across in a professional way. You said semi-professional before. Are we going to change our attire for our new series and put on a button shirt to appear to be the hardworking professionals? What's the vision for the look?
I always have this thing with my wife where I walk downstairs and I actually put a nice shirt on and I put pants over my athletic shorts. She's like, oh, the resident author's in the house as opposed to
There you go.
slumlord who lives upstairs and cranks out his ghostwriting material when no one's watching. So,
well, people do get a look sometimes, right? Lex Friedman is always wearing his suit, his shirt, and his little tie. And it's his image now. And that's partly recognizable. When Jordan Peterson went on his speaking tour, he said he recognized he's going to be in front of thousands and millions of people cumulatively over the course of the tour. This is his chance to make a serious impression and present himself in the way that he wants. He went out, made sure that he had very nice suits, shirts, and was always impeccably dressed. I also, in the course of my career, definitely used dress as part of my arsenal of weapons, not the same kind that you would have used. But for me, psychology was important, and appearing to be well dressed, put together, gave one, even if it was just in your own mind, a feeling of authority. So anyway, all of this is a way of saying I'd consider putting on a button shirt for our podcast, Randy, as we talk about the next theme, which is what are we going to call it? The way of the writer, how to write a book. What do we got in mind? Let's tell people.
So I think that we decided right now the title will be The Way of the Writer. We'll launch it in January. James and I work diligently over the next 3 months to get a cachet of things so that we can get it out weekly without a problem. With all our marketing material, we'll figure it out. And then the idea I had behind it would be that I walk you through my methodology, my procedures that I do to mentor writers. I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now. How they come to me with an idea. And then I talk them through who their ideal reader is and what the purpose of the book is. What's the reader's arc? What's that person going to learn? So this is all for nonfiction initially anyway. And so we're going to talk you through the writing of your book. You'll come up with a theme and everything like that. And then simultaneously, I'll be writing a book and all the things that we discussed about the concept of writing a book and thinking ahead before you write it and make sure all your chapters and scenes are all really pertinent to the reader's journey. I'll write one simultaneously and you will discuss my chapters as we write through it. And so the idea would be we discuss the phases of writing, planning of the material, then we actually start writing. And as we discuss each one of our books, we'll probably start alternating weeks where you'll work on your stuff for 2 weeks. And that week I'll be discussing what I learned and what I need to help with. And then the following week, we'll do yours and we'll go through 2 different types of nonfiction books. We'll see where it goes. I think that we can get into fiction later on. This first part will probably last 3 or 4 months before we can get through our books. Ideally, we finish our first draft of our books before June next year. That'd be the goal.
I like having a goal, Randy, and I like that description. I like the idea of you and I both writing a book in public and using that exercise to illustrate the process that you use to help people write their own books. Should be a really interesting exercise. And in the spirit of experimentation with a valuable purpose, not just for us, but for the people who we hope are listening. Is there an angle that this podcast can be broad enough that it's also interesting to people who are not necessarily looking to write a book, but their angle is, I want to make sure I am paying attention to thinking clearly and communicating clearly and just organizing my thoughts? Because I gather a lot of this is actually around those themes. Do you know what you're talking about? Can you communicate it well? Is there some structured thinking and structured communication angle to this that we could say, look, you may not care about writing a fiction or nonfiction book. You may not care about learning how to do the things that we're going to talk about, but you might be interested in the indirect revelation of, thinking, communicating.
I think that a nonfiction book, depending on the type of nonfiction book, is just a expanded thesis. Like, so for college papers and things, there's a lot of things we're going to talk about that if you're writing a long form college paper, for instance, that you probably need to think about. Like, hey, you don't need to think about just what you're writing about. You need to think about the reader's journey. And we're going to discuss this in later podcasts about when we start our podcast in January. But where does your reader start when he picks up your book? And why did he pick up your book? And how did you convince him to pick up your book? What is his pain point? What is he looking for, he or she? And so then that would be the same thing for your college essay. Are you writing this because the college professor said, write this on this topic? Most of the time you are. But if you're actually writing something worth publishing, then you're looking towards your readers. And so why would the reader turn to this article after he looks at the cover of the medical journal or something? Why would he want to turn to your article and say, well, that looks like an interesting thing because of your title? And you pick there and then you have a good subtitle and maybe the first paragraph, grabs the reader. You have to foresee where your reader's at in their life journey or their education journey or whatever you're discussing, what they think they're going to get out of this article. Why is it going to waste 10 minutes of their time to read this article? And then make sure you deliver at the end. If you're doing a proposal at work, where is the client starting? And especially in sales, right? Where are they starting? How are you grabbing them in there? And are you delivering at the end? Are you delivering a solution? Are you fulfilling their reader's journey of what they thought they were going to get out of this article? Or did you disappoint? And did you say, hey, click on here if you want to buy my product or whatever, right? So I think in that case, it's applicable to a lot of different things.
So I think our working title, The Way of the Writer, is broad enough to encompass those additional use cases. The people who are interested in doing a good job as a student, who are interested in being able to communicate clearly at work. And I'm sure there'll be other settings as well. I like that explanation, Randy. You've already helped me with that little discussion. I can't wait till we get into this. When I write an article now on my blog or on Medium, I do try to write with the reader in mind, but it's almost always at the end. Do I think that there's something that I delivered of value? I have not gotten into the habit of, and I'm looking forward to doing this, asking before I start, who is this for? What's their problem? I could see how that would focus you as you're writing it, not just when you're done, did I do it, but at the start where you say, all right, who am I writing to and what is their state before they come to my article? Why are they here? That already all by itself is a shift in mindset for me. I'm results oriented at the end, but not really necessarily result oriented in the sense of who's coming here and why. And that's already a change in mindset that I'm looking forward to exploring.
I just wrote a op-ed because this August is the anniversary of the evacuation of Afghanistan in 2021, right? So it's 3 years later. And I wrote an op-ed for a friend of mine, or I helped him write it. It was his idea, and then I finessed it using the things we're going to talk about. And he started out with a voice memo to me, like what he wanted to do. And he was setting up the history of the evacuation of Afghanistan and how it turned wrong. And on the 26th is the anniversary of the bomb that went off and 13 American soldiers died and things like that. And he wanted to start out with the history. Well, where are your readers, are the people you want to influence, are they going to be influenced by a history lesson? Because most of those people know what happened. If you say 3 years ago, evacuation of Afghanistan wasn't very successful, and they already know that. But in your title, if you're talking about, we remember the 13 people that died in the Afghan bomb during the evacuation in 2021, now you've already set them up. They're the history. Do you need to repeat the history? You probably need to repeat a little bit of it. But how do you start that article? So they read the title and they're like, I'm interested in this subject. What's this guy got to say about it? How do you grab someone and keep them? What'll make them read to the end? Because at the end is going to be your call to action, right? So you need to really excite them. And so I jumped around on this thing for a while, and I said, there's something to be said that promises were broken. That's the guy was my friend I was helping, who wrote the book Operation Pineapple Express. So I think we're talking about promises that many Americans think that the government made to Afghans that assisted us in Afghanistan, and how we didn't get them out of Afghanistan for whatever reason. We didn't get them visas in time. We didn't have enough planes, whatever. And so I decided to start with some promises are written in blood. If you read that, you're like, well, what promises are those, right? And ideally, you have to be the right person. I don't mean we can't attract everybody, but who are the readers? Who are the readers that we're attracting? A lot of them are military, ex-military, former military, spouses, dependents, people who had a vested interest in the evacuation of Afghanistan. And there's a lot of people that weren't even affiliated with the military too, because there's a lot of non-military people that were left behind as well. If you start with a sentence that's provocative, like some promises are written in blood, well, what does that mean? And so then you start maybe with a small history lesson, and then you talk about the broken promises to the Afghan vets that served by our side, and the translators that helped the nonprofits, and all these other people that were left behind. You talk about the bombing, and then you have a call to action like, hey, if it's political, maybe you need to think really hard about who you should vote, who wouldn't have done this, or who can fix this, or something like that. Or maybe you're just talking about like, hey, there's a nonprofit out there still helping these people. Or maybe you're just talking about being kinder to the Afghan refugees that are being assimilated into the United States culture right now, or something like that. But whatever the call to action is, you've done that setup, you've drawn them in, you've attracted them because you're talking about Afghanistan. And that maybe you're attracting that guy who the Afghan family just moved in, and he doesn't really understand their culture. And so he's like, well, the Afghans, what's going on? And then you understand their situation better, and maybe you're a little bit more understanding of their situation. So it depends on what your call to action at the end of this thing is, but you have to set it up and draw them in.
I think we are going to have a good time with the Writer's Way, Randy. And I would say that if I think of who are the types of listeners we attracted to the Passionately Wrong podcast, I would describe them as passionately curious people who were interested in finding out something new about a topic and were open to letting us do it in the way that we did. I hope that spirit of interest and curiosity keeps you interested in listening to what Randy and I have to say about this topic of writing well, communicating well, organizing your thoughts well, and in the course of writing a book, which is how we're going to go through it to begin with. So thanks very much, everyone, for the time that you spent with us. I know we've enjoyed it, and we look forward to continuing to provide something of interest and value to you. So please keep an eye out at the beginning of 2025 for the new podcast, and we'll do a good job of marketing at least the introduction of it, I suspect, and maybe more. Thanks, everyone. And any final remarks from you, Randy?
No, thanks everyone. For those of you who joined us down this trail and listen to the podcast, we really appreciate you spending time with us. And hopefully the next podcast will intrigue you as well, and maybe give you some tips on how to write better.
Super. Thanks, everyone. And
Bye.
see you next time.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.